Rewind to 2019, and our church email newsletter looked like most. It was a highlight reel of upcoming events and advertisements, suffering from abysmal open rates and even more abysmal click-through rates. If it hit the inbox of 1,000 people, less than 10 would click on anything, and those who did read it were our most insidery insiders, people who love being in the know. Now, of course, these are sincerely wonderful people who sign up for everything no matter what, which means they need serialized email event advertisements less than anyone else. Those we hoped the newsletter would inspire unto hitherto unimagined levels of church involvement habitually trashed the email. Now, I don't judge them. I deleted the email every week because I had no interest in picking through a repetitive, self-promotional event billboard. It was boring and mostly irrelevant. So, if the goal of our newsletter was to gin up signups, then it was failing miserably, precisely because it added no value to the spiritual lives of the hundreds of church members who deleted it by default every single week. I knew we needed to take it back. We needed to reimagine it. I suspected that if we did so, it might even lead to more event signups, and more importantly, more spiritual formation. But before my team could go forward, we had to wrestle with internal politics. At the time, it was apparent to me that the newsletter served no purpose, but it wasn't at all apparent to ministry leaders on our staff, and I can't blame them. In their view, the newsletter was a priceless venue for event announcing, and without it, no one would attend their events, which is kind of a big deal. So we did the hard work of education. We showed leaders the abominable click-through rates and the abominable open rates, and we explained that, at best, the newsletter accounted for roughly 1 to 3 signups per event, and most of them by people who sign up for everything anyway. This won most people to the newsletter destruction cause. But tradition is tradition, and some leaders couldn't be persuaded from their perception of the newsletter as a supernal sign-up god whose supernatural mojo secured the success of almost any event sermonized. No evidence could persuade them otherwise. And it's at this point, which happens in all churches trying to blow up their newsletters, that I guess the project probably comes to an end. And I suspect that this is precisely the juncture at which most church newsletter blowing up projects come to a halt, or at least a compromise, a sort of halfway house between event board and valuable content, which is to say, not a house most people want to live in. Thankfully, our leadership didn't suffer from a failure of nerve. We proposed to the skeptical that they allow us to detonate the newsletter for 1 year. And if their signups experience noticeable decreases, not normal fluctuations, well, then we would reverse course and go back to the old newsletter. But if their signups stayed the same, or even increased, they would allow us to continue to go forward. We made no compromises because we had a clear vision of what the church's newsletter could be. Over the next 3 years, our newsletter subscriptions grew by 10x. Open rates skyrocketed, click-through rates ballooned, and best of all, we were able to show that our new newsletter generated more event signups, not less. What did we do? We gave our church members and attendees a new kind of newsletter, a targeted, structured newsletter with spiritual substance. In the place of a weekly event board, we began a weekly blog written by an assortment of staff and church members. We divide every year into 6 to 8 campaigns, each of which focuses on a different theme or goal. And this allows us to structure the newsletter around a given topic over a period of time, rather than just the latest thoughts of the pastor. For example, last fall, we built content around the theme of prayer. This is a topic relevant both to longtime churchgoers and new converts. In other words, it's the sort of spiritual substance everyone is interested in. During that period, we wrote 11 posts on prayer. We explained what prayer is, why we do it, and when we do it. We wrote about the daily office and how to practice communal prayer. We explored how to pray like the disciples and how to pray like Jesus. We trained people how to pray in marriages, how to pray through decisions, and how to hold a prayer meeting. One of our counselors wrote a fantastic piece about the role of our emotions inside of prayer. Outside of the newsletter, we launched a seasonal twice-daily prayer podcast and created a whole series of social media posts called How Prayer Changed My Life, in which church members shared about their own prayer life. But all of that's probably better suited for a different video. This one is about newsletters. As the above example shows, our newsletters were structured around learning objectives. We slowly built from the what's and whys of prayer to the hows, and they were also targeted. These posts were primarily for people who are newish to formal liturgical prayer practices. The goal was to give them a trellis on which they could grow a deeper prayer life. Lastly, these emails, they were substantive. None of our newsletters were repetitive or fluffy. Readers could expect to learn something new and applicable from every single one. Those three dimensions are the key to our newsletter's high open rate. We're writing for people for their spiritual good in a thoughtful, premeditated way. We put as much work into our newsletter's educational scaffolding and quality as we do into our weekly sermons. And that's made it a valuable source of spiritual formation for our congregation, which means it's always worth clicking open on those emails. But how does that translate to event signups? Well, our campaigns are always conscious of the church calendar and the church season, whether that's Easter or Advent or fall signups or January signups. During our major join-in periods, we intentionally create content around the themes of community and connection, and those posts often link to a specific event at the very end of the post where people can practically pursue what the newsletter commends, being community. Well, now they can click the link and do it themselves. To be clear, these newsletters are not ads. They aren't about what's happening at a given event or group. They're instead highlighting why someone would go to an event to begin with. In other words, why Christians need intimate community, why Christians are called to serve, why Christians need Bible study, why you should invest in your child's spiritual growth. You get the idea. We aren't selling anything. The event signups really are peripheral to what we're doing. What we want to do is convince people of biblical realities and then give them an avenue to apply what they're learning at the end. It's that simple. So now's the time for you to do it. Blow up your church newsletter. No one wants to read it anyway. Email can be an avenue for so much more than skippable advertisements for church events. It can be a key part of how your church pursues spiritual formation.